key pieces of that organization for a long time. Joe Thornton's still looking for a winner, comes over to Toronto. They're having immediate success, and they're getting good goaltending from both Anderson and Jack Campbell. So the Toronto Maple Leafs for sure are looking pretty good early. We got two big name superstars, in my opinion, in the league that are probably going to find new landing spots quickly in Pierre-Luc Dubois and Keith Yandle. Where do you think those guys go?
Oh man, it's a I don't know. Like
I'll tell you,
the problem
Dubois
is,
would fit in great with the Rangers.
I think
If
that
the
the problem.
Rangers to give up their next first round pick, and to give up maybe a Strom, to my opinion, if Columbus wanted Capo Caco, you trade him. And you bring in a guy like Pierre-Luc Dubois, is an established goal scorer in this league. I know Kako was a second overall pick a couple years ago, but he really hasn't found his legs yet in the league. I think that if that's something that Columbus would want in return, I think you'd really have to consider that, because I think that you put him with Lafreniere, and we'll get into him in a little bit later on in the show, uh, that he'll really be able to be really good for the Rangers.
I'd say there's a lot of talk about it. I wouldn't be opposed to it, but the problem is that with the Rangers still being a year away, I think banking on their assets would be a little better than like making a jump leap into this situation, because they don't even have the money to re-sign Dubois at this point. They'd have to wait until next year anyway. So it's interesting because will will the Blue Jackets give like the same division penalty where they have to where the Rangers would have to overpay over
Well,
another
luckily,
team?
it's not the same division.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like, but if
Yeah.
right now it's not in the same division, so like, would they approach it as if they were in the same division? Because let's say the COVID situation ends up easing off until next season, and everything goes back to the way it was in previous seasons, so they're back in the same division. So does the Blue Jackets, do they approach it as if they're in the same division, even though they're not, or do they have to? Will the Rangers have to overpay because in they were in the same division before and probably be in the same division after?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's 100%. You're spot on there. But I mean, he's got Dubois got another year left on his deal after this year, so they don't have to worry about getting him signed right away. I think you can kind of, unless they find a way to get him a bridge deal between this contract and the next one.
Yeah, but
He's got
you're
an
not gonna.
annual AAV of 5 million.
But
So if they
you're
do
not gonna give
trade
up.
for him, you probably can get Columbus to hold on to a little bit of that salary if you give him an extra pick or something. They might be willing to hold on to some of that salary. He's owed 6.5 million next year, but it's only 5 million against the cap. I think you put in a guy now, especially with Lafreniere, with Panarin, Mika. So you have a lot of these names. You add another offensive weapon to that lineup, it's only going to help that team right now. Where, yeah, we said that the Rangers are a year away. I think the current roster is a year away. But if you start trying to bank on assets moving forward, you don't know what you're going to get, right? And that leads into our next conversation about Lafreniere. I mean, this was a guy that was this was the next generational talent coming out of junior, and he really hasn't lived up to it. Are you willing to bank on that? You're not going to get another number one overall pick. It's going to be more the middle of the road now, because the Rangers are probably going to make the playoffs or be close to it. And unless they change the way and the Rangers get lucky again and find themselves in the lottery for no reason, like they did and lucked out to get Lafreniere, then that's where we're going to see them. And instead of that, why not try to get a guy that's been established in the league, that's a superstar in this league, in my opinion, and can be a really good player to help that team out now.
I think the issue there would be looking a step further, where you're not going to give up a Kako and a first round pick and of that kind of a package for somebody you're only going to have for a year and a half. So are you going to be able to hold on to him long term? That would be the question, and that's the only way you make this deal, in my opinion. I think when you look at somebody like, if you look at the Devils, who have a lot of assets and money, and the New York Islanders, I think they would be better fits for for Dubois than the Rangers.
Yeah, you just pissed off a lot of Rangers fans by saying that. You want to watch Dubois go to the Devils or go to the Islanders? Be my guest because he's going to tear that team apart.
Well, it depends on what you're willing to give up, and I'm
Oh, I
not a person.
understand.
Uh, we'll go into our next topic. With this, I don't think. I think the rookies they need time to grow, and I think that asking a 19-year-old to score 50 goals right away is not the way to go. And I believe in the rookies because they're 19 years old and they're not even in their full man bodies yet. So to make the determinations that Kako is not going to be an all-star stud in the future and a scoreless Lafreniere who hasn't scored in 3 games, I don't think that you would call them bust or need to trade them for somebody who's having contract issues in another team. So, like, if they're having contract issues in another team, what's to say they won't have contract issues here?
Well, one, let me break this down first. Dubois doesn't have contract issues in Columbus. He simply just doesn't want to be there and has asked for a trade. Uh, I think what he's getting paid now, he may be due for a $1 million bump, if that. I don't think it's a contract issue more so than he just doesn't want to play in Columbus. Obviously, I mean, Panarin was the same way, right? So was Bobrovsky. Both those guys left. So they just happened to do it in a free agency year. Dubois just wants out now. He probably wants to win now, and I completely agree. If you don't want to be somewhere, don't be there. But as long as you're there, then you got to do what you got to do, right? He's been in the lineup. He's been producing for them. So he has to continue to do what he's got to do for the team. But if he wants out, then Columbus should do their due diligence and try to find him a potential suitor, as long as it suits the organization, because the guy's under contract. So the guy's under contract, they don't have to do anything. And he wants out. If they can find somebody for the package that they want, to take him. Now, going back to Lafreniere and going back to Kakko, this is Kakko's third season, and he really hasn't lived up to the hype that was surrounding him coming into his third season. Unfortunately for Lafreniere, he was pegged as the next McDavid and Matthews. And when you're pegged as the next McDavid and Matthews, you're expected to score 50 goals your first season. Connor McDavid played 48 games. Remember, he got, or 45 games. Remember, he got injured his rookie season and missed half the season. 48 points in 45 games on a Edmonton team that was still very much rebuilding without a lot of assets. Austin Matthews played 82 games, played a full season his rookie year, had 40 and 29 for 69 points in his whole season. So, and then the season after that, Connor McDavid. I mean, Connor McDavid's a tough scenario because he's probably the best player in the world at this point. But he had 100 points, 108 points, 116 points in his next 3 seasons. Austin Matthews was very similar, right? Austin Matthews, 63 points, 73 points, 80 points. When you have this name about you, when you have this air about you, when your name is said as the next one, right? Then you have to live up to those expectations. And sure, you're young, but you should know that coming in that you are that young. You are the number one overall pick, and you should have that. Fortunately, sometimes it doesn't pan out. Like Nail Yakupov comes to mind. Taylor Hall comes to mind also. I think that Taylor Hall was one of the same names coming out. You look at the career trajectories of him, and the number 2 pick in that draft was Tyler Seguin. Look at the career trajectories of both those guys. Taylor Hall's bounced around a little bit. Tyler Seguin won a cup in Boston his rookie season, ended up getting traded to Dallas, went to the cup last year. He's one of the key leaders on that team and key contributors on that team. And when you have that name about you as the next one, you're this generational talent. Like Nico Hischier didn't have that when he was drafted to New Jersey. He didn't have that. This is the next guy, right? This guy is so good, dominant, blah blah blah. He didn't have that, and it showed. Him and Pat and Nolan Patrick in Philly, they didn't have that draft. It was a much weaker draft. But you look at this draft, was a lot of talented guys, and I haven't really looked at too much, but Lafreniere has no points through the first 4 games on the Rangers roster. Is a little concerning. I'm not saying you push the panic button, but it's definitely a little concerning.
Okay, so first off, Kako is in his second season.
Last year wasn't his rookie season.
Yeah, it was Hughes and Kako, and then Kako played 1 season, and now this is his second season.
Okay.
And Lafreniere is 0 for 3, not 4. He's the fourth game will be tomorrow night. But the one thing I still say is that some players have a slower start than others, and I think I think the names that you mentioned with Matthews and McDavid, I think those are the phenomenal exceptions, but I don't think that should be the standard or the rule. I think
Fortunately, it's not the standard of the rule, but it was for Lafreniere because he was put into the same conversation by the media and by scouts as McDavid and Matthews.
right.
And I think that when you get put into that conversation and your name is mentioned with two of the greatest players in our league now, that you have to live up to those expectations. Sure, it may develop down the road, but when you're put right away into that spotlight, he was thrusted into that spotlight. He led the league, the World Juniors when he played there. He led that tournament. He tore that tournament apart, and everyone said, "Yeah, this is the guy, the consensus number one pick." Nobody thinks that this guy shouldn't be the number one guy, and he was. But now you don't have any points your first 3 games into the season. It's a little concerning. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt with the shortened off season, with the limited training camp. You got to give the guy a little bit of benefit of the doubt there. But when your name is mentioned in the same breath as McDavid and Matthews, you have to produce.
Right, and I think eventually he will. It seemed like from the videos I saw from Lafreniere, he's more of a facilitator, I think, than the actual, you know, 50 potential 50 goal scorer. I think he's more of
Well, that's
a
fine. I mean, McDavid had more assists. McDavid's had more assists than goals in every season. So yeah, you could say the same thing about McDavid. But I mean, you look at those guys and you see what they do and how they've. Matthews is probably the opposite, right? Matthews is probably the guy that can score 50 goals a season, but McDavid's more of the facilitator, and he's been tearing up the league. Granted, he's probably the next best player since Sidney Crosby and since Gretzky, but I mean, when you're mentioned, like I keep saying, when you're mentioned in that breath, you got to produce.
right. And then we'll look at my greatest example is Leon Draisaitl, who had 9 points. He had 2 goals and 7 assists in 37 games in his rookie season. I think it takes time for players to develop. I think when you look at we go back to football and Drew Brees, the reason why Phillip Rivers was drafted was because Drew Brees had like a slow start to his career, and then all of a sudden he ended up being one of the greats. I think there's arguments both ways that can be made, but the main fact is
Draisaitl went in that draft, I believe, with Nolan Patrick and Nico Hischier, where nobody said these guys were the consensus picks, right? Leon Draisaitl was never the, oh my God, you got to draft this guy or you're missing out. It wasn't that McDavid's or Matthew conversation. And you can go back to bring to your Drew Brees comment. Drew Brees wasn't a top pick when he was drafted. When you're the number one overall pick, there's expectations. And when you don't meet those expectations, especially in the biggest market probably in the league in New York, outside of Montreal, they're going to start talking. And Matthews, his first game ever in the NHL, scored 4 goals.
Yeah.
I mean that doesn't happen.
Who else did that? Yeah.
But that you're through your first 3 games and you don't have a point, that's a little concerning. And I didn't say to press the panic button on him and to get rid of him and that he's a bust, because he's probably not. I'm saying it's a little concerning a week or 2 into the season.
All right. Well, we'll see how that ends up developing into later. Well, this will definitely be a topic that we touch on in future shows. That's for sure.
For sure, absolutely. And guy that was drafted right behind him, Bowen Byram, is making his debut in the league tonight in LA against the Avalanche tonight, and Tim Stützle got his first goal last week. So Tim Stützle's on the board, the second overall pick to Ottawa, and he's playing well. So he's playing on that line with Brady Tkachuk, and that team. I mean, they haven't won as many games as they probably want to. I think they're 1-1-1 at this point, or 1-2, but he's starting to put it together. So that's why it's a little concerning, because the guy behind him is producing. He's got 3 points already on the season on a team that hasn't won games yet.
Yeah, but we'll look at Quentin Bayfield, who isn't he's not up in the league yet. He's in the minor
He's
league.
he's making his debut tonight in LA.
Oh, okay, all right. So,
He's playing his first game tonight.
I thought you said Bynum because I know.
I meant Byfield. These names, man, they're all too close
Yeah,
together.
yeah, because I know Baron Bynum, who was the fourth overall pick, is for the Colorado Avalanche 2 years ago. He's on the practice. He's on the taxi squad, making his ready to make his
Quentin
debut.
Byfield is in the lineup tonight against the Avalanche for the Kings.
Nice, nice.
So we'll see what happens there. That's the third overall pick. So I hope that Lafreniere figures it out. Obviously, it's going to take some time. We can revisit the Capo Caco conversation. You're talking about a guy that was minus 26 his first year in the league. So that's another issue in and of itself. But I think if we want to circle this all back to Pierre-Luc Dubois, if the Blue Jackets want him, you give him to him. And to get a guy like Dubois, I mean, maybe you don't want to give up him and a number 1 round pick, but to get a guy like Dubois who is that good, and we didn't even talk about Keith Yandle. Keith Yandle's a veteran defenseman who he has the Ironman streak coming in. The Ironman streak at 850 something games at this point. He's 90 games away from the record. He was rumored to be a healthy scratch week 1 or game 1 of the season. Ends up not being, gets 2 goals in the Panthers' first 2 games. So Keith Yandle's on the board. Keith Yandle's contributing. I think this is the guy Boston needs in their lineup.
I think the problem, real quick before we end the show, is the problem with Keith Yandle is going to be the size of his contract to the production. Yeah, he's a great offensive defenseman, but he's not great defensively. And for the amount, I think he makes like $7 million a year. That's very tough for somebody.
They're definitely going to have to hold on to some of that money for sure in order to trade him. But if he's not part of their future, then they have to figure that out.
Absolutely.
So if they're going to have to eat some money on the contract, then they will. Keith Yandle's a Boston guy from Boston. The Bruins don't have a lot of veteran presence on their back end. I think he fits in well there.
Yeah, well, we'll see how that ends up developing and how the Florida Panthers can wiggle around that leverage, because right now they have none. That's why he's still there.
Exactly.
All right. So that does it for our show for this week. Thank you very much, Harrisburger, for joining us from upstate New York. We will both be in the studio next week. Thank you so much for joining us. LDM Radio Sports Talk. My name is Alfonso Caldero. We'll see you next week.